Welcome back to the Citystead, everyone. I am, of course, Josh. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about starting an urban homestead. Alright, so if you guys know, we started a collaboration series with some of our other fellow urban homesteading friends. Hey, it's a good life, homestead dreaming, and grow your groceries. And it's really good. It covers a whole gamut of a big span around California, Oklahoma, Michigan, and then across the pond to the UK. So you can get a lot of different perspectives of building homesteads in different areas. So this is number 2 in this series, and I think we're doing 5 videos altogether. So buckle up, guys. Of course, I will make a playlist and I will put it right here for you guys to check out, and it'll also be at the end of this video. I suggest going and checking it out and seeing the different things that people are doing on urban homesteads and how they're building them, because we're all doing it a little bit different depending on lot size, you know, different temperatures, all sorts of good stuff. So really interesting series for you guys to check out. I highly suggest doing it. But today we're going to talk about things you need to think about when you're building that urban homestead. So one of the most important things to me on an urban homestead would be soil. And you don't really think about it when you first start gardening. You know, in fact, you might even call it dirt then. But soil is the encapsulation of life out in your garden. It is literally the most important thing. Without, well, I guess second, water. But without really good soil, you're not going to have the best plants that you can get. So while our garden looks like all these raised beds and stuff right now, it actually used to be a flat ground that we tilled over and over and over again. And my wife and I did that for about 6 years. And that actually, I don't recommend tilling. I actually like not tilling, and you can see there's a lot of grass and weeds back there. That's a lot of that's due to tilling. It's just tilling grass and stuff under, and it comes right back up. If we had done different methods of building soil, we'd probably be a lot less weeds right now than what we are. So let's talk about some ways that you can build your soil. So I think one of the best ways to build yourself some soil is to start with like a layering mulch type technique. So what we did on most of this garden after we started going through was putting down cardboard and newspaper, and on top of that we did a lot of wood chips, and the wood chips will break down, feed some nitrogen back into that soil. It'll become really rich soil. Now, like I said, we did till, and that's not bad. You're putting stuff back in there, natural organic matter back into the soil, but you're also putting a lot of that grass seed back in there, which you don't necessarily want. And another great way to build some soil would be to start doing some composting. So we just recently got into kind of having a worm farm and worm tea and worm compost. And that's a really good livestock if you are on a urban lot, smaller area, and you can get some really good nutrients out of that to build soil. If you have chickens or something like that, then you're already better off than most of us. You got chicken magic going on. That manure is like gold for any kind of garden. So there's different things you can do, right? So composting is number 1. So setting up some sort of compost right when you start is probably a really important thing to do. So it's hard to tell, but this is actually a compost pile. When I first started out, I had a 1-bin compost pile, and it was kind of a no rules type compost, which I don't know if I suggest anymore. This was just my first sorry excuse for doing a compost. And as you can see, I just kind of pile weeds and stuff here now as I pull them, and I just kind of let it naturally break down, and eventually I will get all that out of the way and start a real, you know, much better system of composting. But there are other different things you can do for composting on your urban lot. Something I've been toying with a lot of doing is these Rubbermaid tote composters, and I had one of these originally that we did a few years ago. It worked really good. We just kind of mix soil, and as we got, you know, kitchen scraps, it'd go in there, we mix them in, just keep mixing them in, and it worked great. And I started this new one that's just newspaper and grass clippings. We're going to see what it does. Right now it hasn't really broken down a ton. I'll give you guys a little sneak peek. So you can see it's mixed up. It's got a little bit of a breakdown, but not a ton yet. So I got to actually do a little mix on that later today. But building some compost is going to be a great thing, because you're going to give yourself free soil, and that free soil is going to be very nutrient dense and rich, and that's what you want. I mean, we all know things that are really expensive are like soil, wood chips, that stuff's really expensive. So the more you can cut down on having to buy that from an outside source, making your own, it's gonna be better off for your homestead. When I was first starting to really get into doing this a lot more, I had this thing up in my head that I was gonna tear out anything that wasn't food. Now that is a huge mistake, obviously, because we need pollinators. So while this does not necessarily equal food, it does equal food for pollinators. It gets them into our yard, gets them moving pollen around, and actually gets them making the food for us. Now it was my wife that straightened me out on this and said, you know what, we need flowers out there. She really wanted flowers, so she wins, of course. And I ended up going through and I planted a lot of flowers. Actually, there's like 4 beds here that are all just flowers. This one you can see is about to open up. And what we did was we kind of spaced them out so they would open at different times throughout the year. So early in the year, we don't mow super quick because we want the dandelions, we want the clover, we want that stuff for the bees. We want to bring them to our yard, get them here, get them used to coming here so they can come back and pollinate all our vegetables. So we do that, and then we do lilies, and then we do roses, like all sorts of stuff, just kind of rotate it. Black-eyed Susan behind us and Shasta daisies. So you kind of rotate it so they bloom different times of the year and keep those pollinators fed and coming back to your yard. And I have to tell you that since taking my wife's advice and having a lot more flowers out there in the yard, I have noticed that we had produce a lot more vegetables than we were before, when my idea was to get rid of all the flowers. So while edibles is great, I would love to have an all edible yard, flowers are very, very important to keep your pollinators happy and to keep your pollinators coming back to your yard to pollinate everything else. You'll have to forgive me because it's gotten a little bit weedy over here. I gotta get back here and get busy. But another thing you can do for pollinators is actually get yourself some. So urban beekeeping is actually a very, very popular thing, and bees seem to really thrive in urban areas. I think because there's a lot of flowers, there's a lot of diversity all around the area for everything, that, you know, you see a lot of urban beekeeping being a really, really successful thing. So we went and started this year our own little bee hive. It's actually doing pretty good right now. We went through some struggles early on, but now I think we got things dialed in a little bit better, and we're actually thriving a little bit in the bees. But I think this is a great thing to do. And as you can see, I have my bees in this tiny back corner over here, right? Between the greenhouse and the garage. That's it. That's all the space they need. And if you're like me and you have little kids, you make a gate so they can't get back here. But this is something that doesn't take a lot of space, and something that you can do in an urban lot. I mean, you gotta check with your city, because cities might have different rules, but for the most part, people aren't gonna complain about having bees. There's just something so cool about being up early in the morning as they're waking up and starting to take off on their flights. Kind of see them come out of the hive and then just off they go. So another thing that's really important for starting a homestead is thinking about water. As we know, water basically equals life. So your 1A and 1B type things that you really want to worry about on your homestead are your soil health and water. Because without water, nothing will grow. Without good soil, things won't grow well. So they kind of go hand in hand. You really need to have them interlocked and together. So depending on what kind of climate you're in, rain is going to mean different things to you. Water is going to mean much different things to you. We're here in Michigan. We actually get a lot of a summer rainfall. It's something that we don't have to worry so much about. Like, I barely ever water my garden, as opposed to other people who might have to water, you know, almost daily, because of their climate just being a lot drier and a lot, you know, more need for it. So we don't really have to do it. There is something else we did, though, to try to limit the amount of watering that we have to do. And that comes back to putting these wood chips in the garden. So not only are these helping to build soil, but they actually hold a lot of water, a lot of moisture in the soil. Kind of lock it in and it stays there. These soak up a little bit of water. They let them out as they go down into the soil and everything. So wood chips help keep water in our garden. We barely ever water, maybe in the early stages, but as like this point on, in June to September, I probably will water maybe once or twice, and that's only when it's, you know, like 100 degrees for a week and we don't get a thunderstorm. But for the most part, on my end, I don't ever water, and the wood chips really help do that. Now, just because we don't have to water a lot doesn't mean that we're not conscious about trying to use some of that rain to our benefit for the garden, for starting seeds and all that good stuff. As you can see behind me, there's barrels in here. Those are full of rainwater that we used as a heat sink in the greenhouse. And I'm going to set up a system to actually try to capture more rainwater inside this greenhouse with the greenhouse. But we also do some other water catchment on some gutters. I will show them to you, but know that I'm about to fix them because they do not look great. The Leaning Tower of Water. So we have some rain barrels set up under the gutters, and we actually collect a lot of rain, and we use that early stages of the garden for watering newly planted plants, seeds, all that kind of stuff until the real rains fall. We use a lot of that, and we don't use the hoses often. We try to water things by hand, which does take a little bit more time, but it's better water. It's better for the plants to get that rainwater, that natural water, than it is to get stuff from the hose. So, side note on water catchment, I do know it is illegal in a few states. I don't know how it is, but if it's illegal in your state, I don't know what you could do. But I would say, usually you can do things and ask for forgiveness as opposed to asking for permission, and you're usually better off. So I would say, even if your state says it's illegal, there ain't no harm in putting some buckets out and accidentally catching some rainwater, is there? So I think one of the most important things to think about when you're building an urban homestead is your layout. How are you going to lay out your urban homestead to work for you and all the things that you want to do with the space that you have? So something we really wanted to do was kind of create like our own little oasis. So even though we are in the city, we went along our fence line, and if there was stuff there that was green, good. We had a lot of black raspberries, and we left it, and we let stuff grow wild. We let the grapevines grow wild because it creates this great little green wall all the way around us. And you can barely tell we live in the city. But I think of this wall as a living wall out here. There's a lot of life. There's actually a lot of food just all the way around our yard. And then we set up a kind of a back orchard area where we have a big fruit tree row line right here. And we're working on expanding that further out as we go. As you can see, this is the fence line, right? So it's just beautiful berries, just waiting to ripen so we can eat on them. And it's just such a good use of fence to grow things that are like climbing vines, you know, climbing flowers, any kind of berry, stuff like that, all sorts of stuff like that you can put right along this fence line. It's going to give you a little more feeling of kind of countryness, if you will. Just not being in the masses. You'll actually have a little bit of privacy. It's good to build a privacy wall, and if you're going to do it, you might as well make it nice and green and lush and edible. So while talking layout, we got to talk about your sun and use of your sun. So for us, the sun rises back there. It comes over, and the place in the yard that got the most sun was right here behind our garage, and that's where we put all our garden bed. We built all of our beds right there. And we do have a little bit of growing over here that used to be like a pond when we moved in, but we filled it in and we make a lot of more food, a lot more herbs, beans, all that kind of stuff over there. So it's kind of like another separate little area, but this is where almost all of our food is growing right here. And it just worked really well because it gets a lot of the morning, afternoon sun into the late evening sun, and we've never really had a problem. Obviously, as our trees have gotten bigger here, it blocks a little bit of that morning sun, but it's still not enough to really dampen the garden itself. Now, while thinking of your layout, it's good to think about things that you want out of your garden. Obviously, I wanted some food, and depending on how you want to do things, you can fence them in, all that kind of stuff. I left mine wide open because I want the kids to be able to like easily free range the garden. It's part of the reason is I just want the kids to experience the garden as a place of play and, you know, wonderment and enjoyable food, free to pick whenever they want. So not having walls and making it easier for the kids to traverse in and out of the garden, to me, was kind of important how I wanted to set it up. Just because I think it's great for the kids to be out in the garden and experience it in their own unique way. blocking them out kind of makes them feel unwelcome, in my opinion. I know pest wise you got to keep your pests out, but I don't, you know, it's just so one of those things about creating that balance to make that happen. But in creating the layout of our garden, I knew one thing that we need here in Michigan is like a greenhouse, because we can't start seeds outside as early as other places, and this will buy us a lot of time to actually get really started early, established early. And in our case, we built some beds in here, you can see down here, and we actually overwintered some stuff, some lettuce, kale, before the groundhog ate it. But we had some stuff in here growing all winter long, and we were able to pick a little bit of lettuce, a little bit of kale, stuff like that. So it's great to think about what you're gonna do. Like, I wanted a greenhouse because I want to start seeds early. I want to try to extend my season. So having a greenhouse is an important part of my layout. You might be in a warmer climate, maybe a greenhouse is not very good for you, but for us, it's a great addition. So in keeping with the ideal that we need sun to heat up a greenhouse, you can see we put it in the garden, and you know, it collects all that sun, the same sun the garden gets all throughout the day. So building the greenhouse was important. I really wanted to do the greenhouse, and I also knew that one day I wanted to keep bees. So you guys have already seen, I showed you where the hive was. Right back here, I built this fence to keep the kids out. And this was all something I had been thinking about for 3 years when I started building this garden the way it was. I knew I was going to put the greenhouse here, and I knew I wanted this little area to be able to use for something future, like the bees. So one of the reasons I wanted to put them back there was that I knew I could change their flight pattern over top of that greenhouse and get them a little higher off the ground, kind of right where the kids play. So the hive's right there, the garden's right here, this is where the kids will be the most, and you can see their play sets like right there. Jumbo castle happening. So they're going to be in this area a lot. I don't want the bees to be, you know, open, free, and down low in this area, so I put them behind the greenhouse to kind of get them to fly a little bit higher as they're coming back in to where they need to go for putting back the nectar and doing all their good stuff. So that was kind of like an ideal that I was playing with, and I wanted to make sure I could keep them out of the hive so that they don't get stung, they don't play around it, because it can be dangerous, you know. They can get in there and just get curious, especially the really little ones. And we just don't want that. We don't want any mistakes happening. We don't want no stings on the little kids. So part of designing the layout was things that you know you want to do, and then trying to find good places to put them to utilize as much space as you can out in your urban homestead. Alright, so hopefully this gave you guys some ideals to think about as you're building your own urban homestead, and I highly suggest doing it. Get yourself a garden, get yourself some chickens if you want, if you can handle it, some quail maybe. It's a good homestead animal, maybe rabbits. Things to think about, I suggest beekeeping. So as you're building towards your urban homestead, a lot of stuff to think about, a lot of stuff to kind of plan out, but it's good to sort of put a plan together, even if it's only little bits and pieces, you know, and you just kind of mesh it together as you get further and further into it. That's kind of what we did here. We had a broad plan, and then we kept building upon it, and then we got to think about other elements and just kind of adding it all together. And it works pretty well for what we're doing. There's a few things I still want to, you know, update and change, but we'll get to that in another video. But hopefully this gives you guys some inspiration. Hopefully you're enjoying this series. Remember, check out the playlist right there and see all of my friends and all the great stuff they're doing at their urban homesteads. And that's it. That's all I got for you today. Remember guys, be bold and grow bold. And as always, I will see you in that very next video.